February 1943, the desert was still burning. Black smoke drifted across the stony ridgelines west of Kasserine, rising from shattered trucks, twisted half-tracks, and the steel carcasses of American armor. The sun hung low, a dull, orange disk sinking behind jagged Tunisian hills, casting broken shadows across a battlefield that only hours before had been alive with fire and confusion. German boots crunched over chalk-white sand and spent cartridges. Panzer grenadiers moved quietly, studying what remained of the enemy. A cold wind pushed dust through the open hatches of abandoned American machines. Two German officers halted in front of something unfamiliar. Not a tank, not a field gun. Something in between tracks, a turretless armored hull, and atop it, a heavy 105mm howitzer. Welded into a fighting mount beside it, another machine, slender, angular, holding a long-barreled 3-inch gun in a rotating turret. The M7 Priest, the M10 Wolverine. Self-propelled guns, mass-produced, mobile, and new to this theater. One officer ran a gloved hand along the armor plates, tracing the crude welding marks, then tapped the breech. He did not speak at first, but his silence said enough. America, the nation they thought slow, unready, and inexperienced, had rolled onto the battlefield with weapons Germany did not expect so soon. Machines that could fire on the move. Machines that did not need to unlimber, dig, or wait. Artillery, armored, tracked, and relentless. To understand why this moment unsettled German command, we must return to a world before these guns existed, when armies still believed firepower belonged behind the lines. War had once moved slowly. Artillery dug in. Horses strained, and infantry slogged through mud, while guns were dragged into position like ancient siege engines. World War I taught commanders a brutal lesson. Firepower could shatter armies, but only if it arrived in time. And time, on those stagnant fronts, was measured in hours, sometimes days. Between the wars, most nations clung to a familiar truth. Artillery was king, but artillery would remain towed. Immense cannons were mounted on wooden carriages, limbered to trucks or horses, and hauled across terrain at the mercy of mud, weather, and luck. It was slow, unwieldy, and predictable, yet tradition held fast. No major power, not even the United States, envisioned a future where guns rode into battle armored, tracked, and self-propelled. America, after all, entered the 1930s with an army smaller than Portugal's. Budget cuts, political caution, and national focus inward meant innovation moved at a crawl. Its formations drilled with Great War tactics. Its officers studied trench maps and barrage charts. Not fast-moving warfare, American doctrine saw artillery as fire support for infantry, not a weapon that would race alongside tanks. Then, in 1939, Europe erupted, and Germany revealed a terrifying idea. Blitzkrieg armored spearheads, moving faster than any war plan expected. Stukas screaming overhead, infantry pushing close behind, and more critically, supporting fire that arrived with the attack, not after trenches were dug and guns unlimbered. Germany had not yet perfected self-propelled artillery, but it understood mobility. Assault guns like the Stug 3, low-slung, armored, and direct firing, rolled into combat, smashing strong points and backing advancing infantry. They were not true artillery platforms, but they proved something. Firepower that moves is firepower that changes. Battles, American observers took notice. So did those in Britain and the Soviet Union. An old world was dying, one where Soldiers waited for guns to catch up. See, new one was emerging. One where steel and fire could advance together. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, its high command faced a truth impossible to ignore. American forces would need to fight a mechanized enemy across vast terrain. Mobility was not merely an advantage, it was survival. But America lacked experience. It lacked modern doctrine. What it possessed instead was something Germany could neither match nor stop: industrial capacity on a scale the world had never seen. And so, in workshops and factories, engineers revisited ideas previously shelved as impractical. If a tank could carry a gun, why not build a gun on a tank chassis and let it fire without delay? Early experiments appeared crude. Open-topped structures mounted on tank hulls, guns bolted to frames, rough welds and exposed crews, yet they represented the future. The T-19 howitzer motor carriage, little more than a 105mm gun strapped to a half-track, was a beginning. The M3 GMC, armed with a 75mm gun, followed, and far more ambitious machines waited behind them. While Germany refined, perfected and optimized, America accelerated. Speed first, refinement later. If a design worked, or worked well enough, it would reach the battlefield. In 1942, the U.S. Army began preparing for its first major clash with Axis ground forces. The amphitheaters of land and desert in North Africa would become its testing ground, a place where new machines and untested crews would face seasoned German veterans. American armored divisions sailed not only with tanks, but with an idea that would soon reshape modern warfare: artillery that could follow the attack, support armor, and deliver fire without pausing to deploy. The officers walking the dunes after Kasserine had seen the proof. Germany's advantage in armored doctrine was real, but it would not remain uncontested. A silent threat had rolled into North Africa. Unrefined, yet powerful, young in doctrine but vast in potential. Soon, German intelligence would report unfamiliar silhouettes. Soon, U.S. production lines would roar to life. Soon, the battlefield itself would transform. And to understand the magnitude of that change, we must look deeper into the factories, doctrines, and minds that turned an unprepared America into the arsenal of mobile fire. Factories had become America's battlefield. Where Germany perfected steel through precision and doctrine, the United States forged victory through scale, urgency, and relentless adaptation. Assembly lines in Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Philadelphia turned out machines at a pace that defied traditional military planning. What had once produced automobiles, locomotives, and tractors now rolled out armored hulls, gun mounts, transmissions, and turret rings. The U.S. Army's transformation was swift and unapologetically practical. It did not attempt to build the most elegant weapon. It aimed to build the right weapon, fast and in numbers overwhelming enough to shape battlefields across continents. Self-propelled firepower was no longer a concept. It was a necessity. In early 1942, as the first elements of America's armored forces prepared for North African deployment, the weapons that would alter artillery warfare began to take shape. The M7 Priest, named by British crews for its pulpit-like machine gun ring, emerged as a workhorse. Built on the chassis of the M3 and later the M4 Sherman, it carried a 105mm howitzer, a gun that could speak with thunder and move as fast as advancing armor. Open-topped, vulnerable to shrapnel and snipers, it was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be present. At the front, firing when needed. Not waiting miles behind, alongside it came another innovation, the M10 Wolverine, a tank destroyer with a 3-inch gun and a turret, a hybrid of artillery power and tank mobility. Not as heavily armored as a Panzer, Not yet refined into the later M18 Hellcat or M36 Jackson, but powerful enough to meet German armor in open country. These vehicles represented more than engineering. They symbolized a doctrinal shift that Europe had underestimated, where German artillery often remained methodical, towed, and prepared for set-piece engagements. American planners envisioned a battlefield in motion. Mobile columns, rapid exploitation, mechanized infantry, and armored thrusts backed by guns that did not wait for horses, trucks, or rails. Doctrine adapted with the machines. The U.S. Army formalized the concept of the Armored Field Artillery Battalion, placing mobile howitzers at the fingertips of forward commanders. Fire missions were called, coordinated, and delivered with startling speed. Forward, observers rode in armored vehicles. Radios crackled with precision and coordination. American artillery, already famous for accuracy, now added mobility to its strengths. German. Intelligence files from late 1942 and early 1943 began noting these developments with increasing concern. Reports described American units maneuvering with an independence unusual for newly raised formations. Officers noted how quickly U.S. fire support arrived, even when columns advanced across rough terrain. These were not the hesitant forces Germany expected. They were learning, adapting, and arriving with new machinery faster than German planners believed possible, yet the transformation was not smooth. Early SPG crews were inexperienced. Mechanical breakdowns tested patience. Commanders, accustomed to towed guns, struggled with the freedom and responsibility of mobile power. North Africa would reveal painful lessons, and not every gun that rolled into Tunisia would survive its first battle unscathed. But something fundamental had changed. No longer would artillery be dragged into position like relics of a slower age. No longer would infantry wait helplessly for guns to arrive. The battlefield was evolving into a realm of speed, coordination, and mechanized precision. And as American armored columns gathered in staging areas from Algeria to Tunisia, as priests and wolverines clattered across ports and rumbled through supply depots, German commanders began to sense it. A nation once dismissed as industrial but militarily naive had discovered a new language of war, one spoken not only with tanks, but with guns that moved as fast as ambition required. The first American crews to operate self-propelled guns were not seasoned veterans. They were young men, factory workers, farm hands, clerks, suddenly thrust into a desert continent half a world away. They trained in California dust and Texas heat, but no exercise field could match the cruelty of Tunisia's battlefields. Their machines were loud, cramped, and exposed, sand-clogged moving parts. Shell. Casings burned bare hands. Enemy shells tore into open fighting compartments. And yet crews learned quickly, because survival demanded it. An M7 team could drop trails nowhere, prepare firing tables on the move, and unleash a barrage with startling speed. Forward observers called corrections by radio, and gunners adjusted elevation and traverse with instinct born not of textbooks, but of combat urgency. Failures came first. Shells fell short. Enemy counterfire found them. Positions were chosen poorly. Coordination struggled to keep pace with ambition, but each mistake carved lessons into muscle and memory, and those lessons spread, passed across. Fire bases, convoys, and bivouacs, a brotherhood forged in dust and recoil. These men were not polished soldiers of an old European army. They were Americans, learning, adapting, and fighting with machines built in a rush, but wielded with growing confidence. Their Resolve gave mobility meaning, a self-propelled. Gun is only steel until a crew turns it into a heartbeat of the battlefield, and by spring 1943, those heartbeats were synchronizing into a rhythm Germany had not anticipated. The technological angle, tracks, power and rapid fire to the untrained eye, a priest looked crude. Open top, thin armor, square edges, weld seams visible, not machined smooth like German steel, but efficiency and purpose are not always elegant. The M7 was designed to do one thing relentlessly: bring artillery to the front faster than the enemy could react. A towed gun needed tractors, cables, setup time, firing position preparation. The priest needed none of it. Its tracks clawed through sand and mud. Its engine roared forward with armored formations, and its gun elevated quickly to send steel arcing across the horizon. Mobility transformed firepower into presence. Fire support no longer arrived, eventually. It arrived with the attack, moving in step with tanks and infantry, ready to halt counterattacks or soften defenses before riflemen closed in. Even the M10, though not a traditional artillery piece, embodied the same philosophy. A gun liberated from static doctrine, built to maneuver and strike. German guns were brilliant instruments in isolation, precise, resilient, often superior in craftsmanship. But they moved behind the army, protected by doctrine rather than armor. America changed the equation. Artillery was no longer a distant voice. It became a shadow moving with the spearhead, carrying thunder on steel tracks. The doctrinal angle, speed over. Ritual European generals were raised in the school of deliberate. Fire, maps spread wide, angles measured, positions, prepared observation posts established like clockwork mechanisms born of tradition. America did not have time for ritual. Its forces were building doctrine as they fought, guided by officers who embraced radio, improvisation, and practical efficiency over ceremony. Fire direction centers became the brain of mobile war. Observers advanced with tanks. Artillery commanders responded to real-time demands, not pre-planned barrages. Speed replaced perfection, and yet effectiveness grew. A message could travel from forward scout to gun crew in seconds. A request could become explosions on target in minutes. What mattered was timing, not tradition. This was not refinement. It was revolution. Germany prized mastery. America prized adaptation. Both philosophies had power, but in a war defined by movement, one philosophy gained a decisive edge. As dust storms swept the Tunisian plains and the echoes of firing tables gave way to the roar of engines, a new way of war emerged, one where artillery no longer followed. It led. And across the desert, German officers began to realize that their enemy did not merely copy tactics, it reinvented them. The battlefield was shifting, but understanding America's leap requires seeing the war through another set of eyes. Those watching from the other side of the gun sights, realizing their assumptions were eroding one shock at a time. War is rarely transformed by one nation alone. Innovation provokes reaction. Doctrine shapes counter-doctrine. And as Americans self-propelled, guns rumbled onto the battlefield. The shock they produced did not arise from their steel alone, but from what they represented to an enemy forged in an older fire. Foi die Sun, an vorn, the German perspective. Confidence meets surprise. Germany entered the war believing its armored doctrine stood unmatched. Panzer divisions moved with orchestration, supported by flexible artillery units and the formidable Stüge 3. German gunners were highly trained, their fire discipline refined by years of doctrine and combat experience. To them, artillery was a calculated instrument, positioned deliberately, supplied carefully, and protected by procedure. The idea of exposing artillery crews in open-topped vehicles seemed reckless, almost amateurish. So when German officers examined the first captured M7 priests and M10 Wolverines in Tunisia, confusion mixed with curiosity. The machines were not elegant. Their armor felt thin. Their welds lacked finesse. But their presence, so close to the front, so quickly deployed, told a story Germany had underestimated. America had embraced mobility in a way that could not be dismissed. Reports flowed upward. American units appeared able to bring heavy guns directly into battle, without pausing, without entrenching, without waiting for supply columns to catch up. To German tacticians, this was disruptive. To German strategists, unsettling. War diaries and post-action analyses note increasing concern. U.S. mobile artillery responds with unusual rapidity. Self-propelled guns move in concert with armored units. Enemy barrages occur sooner than expected. This was not supposed to happen. The United States was seen as inexperienced, industrial but doctrinally immature. Yet here it was, fielding a weapon system Germany had not prioritized. In numbers, Germany could not match. Confidence did not collapse, but certainty trembled. A rival philosophy of war had arrived, crude in places, imperfect but scalable and relentless. And Germany, already stretched across continents and skies, now faced an opponent learning faster than old judgments. Aloud, Bert, Daitite, logistical angle, factories as firepower. Europe produced tanks like craftsmen forged, swords. Measured, refined, precise. America produced them like a rising tide. Self-propelled guns were not just battlefield weapons. They were the industrial voice of a nation awakening to total war. Steel mills poured plate by the acre. Rail yards moved engines and transmissions by the thousands. Shipyards stacked hulls like crates bound for distant shores. To build mobile firepower, one needs engines, gearboxes, steel, training, fuel, mechanics, and transport capacity. Germany possessed expertise. America possessed capacity. The result was decisive. A damaged priest could be repaired with spare parts pulled from stockpiles measured not in crates, but rail cars. A destroyed M10 could be replaced from factories that rolled forward like industrial armies. Germany, by comparison, refined and upgraded Stugs, Jagdpanzers, converted chassis. Effective? Sometimes brilliant. But each step required time, and time was Germany's scarcest resource. Logistics is a quiet language of war, spoken not in barrages, but in supply depots. In that language, the U.S. spoke fluently. Its self-propelled guns were not just mobile, they were sustainable, a weapon born from a strategy that believed firepower must move constantly and be replaced endlessly if lost. This was not simply military evolution. It was economic inevitability made steel. The psychological angle, firepower, that would not wait. Every war has a moment when an army realizes the enemy will not march at its pace. For German troops facing priests and wolverines, that moment crept in under dust clouds and engine noise. American barrages came sooner than expected, often before defensive lines were ready. Counterattacks met guns that rolled forward with tanks rather than lingering behind infantry. Even if a priest lacked the armor of a panzer or the sophistication of a stooge, it carried a different weapon. Presence. A psychological shadow. An assurance that wherever American armor went, crushing fire followed. Doctrine had shifted from sequential warfare to simultaneous force. Movement and fire no longer traded places. They marched together. To soldiers accustomed to artillery arriving only after positions were set, this was disorienting. Positions that once felt safe while guns maneuvered no longer offered refuge. The battlefield had become unpredictable, fluid, faster, louder. Fear grows when expectations collapse. And Germany's expectations of American slowness, of artillery delayed, of inexperienced command, were dissolving. The war was changing in front of them, and change, even when met with courage, carries weight. Machines rattled, forward. Doctrines flexed or shattered. Perceptions shifted from dismissive confidence to wary respect. The shock Germany first felt in Tunisia was only the beginning. Soon, these vehicles would prove themselves not just as tools of learning, but as instruments of transformation, in battles where mobility and fire converged into a new rhythm of war.